In 1872, professor and baseball fanatic Horace Wilson was teaching in Japan. With his students needing more physical exercise, he introduced them to our great sport. Baseball's popularity grew quickly, and over 150 years later, remains Japan's national pastime. Major League Baseball also played a critical role in the game's development far east. Many trips have been made, whether as part of barnstorming tours or goodwill gestures. With the Tokyo series taking center stage in the present day, there's no better time to take a trip back to MLB's previous visits. Come 1931, baseball was quite developed in America, full of Hall of Fame talents. Several future Cooperstown members, the likes of Lou Gehrig and Lefty Grove, teamed up for a barnstorming tour of Japan. They were extremely successful, going 17-0 against Japanese universities and amateur teams. Baseball there was still in its infancy, decades before talent would jump significantly. The trip was a success, and fans in Japan were more than happy to see America's top ball players, but there was one significant drawing card missing: the Great Bambino. This inspired MLB's best to return 2 years later. Nearly 500,000 citizens lined the streets of Tokyo to welcome the world's best ball players back to their native land. Now led by Babe Ruth, confetti and streamers rained down as limousines escorted them through the massive crowd. Ruth, now 39 years old and just weeks away from being released by the Yankees, was still the biggest athlete on the planet. To those in Japan, he represented the pinnacle of the sports world. He wasn't the only star though, as he was accompanied by Gehrig, Jimmy Fox, Earl Averill, Charlie Gehringer, and other timeless greats. The Americans stayed in Japan for a month, set to play 18 games in 12 cities. With World War II less than a decade away, there were plenty of underlying politics, but the tour generated goodwill and brought the two nations closer together as they shared their love for baseball. 2 years shy of Japan founding their first professional league, Matsutaro Shoriki brought together the country's best amateur players to form the All-Nippon team, which featured 11 future Japanese Baseball Hall of Famers. The skill gap between the All-Americans and All-Nippon team was overwhelming, with Babe and the boys going a perfect 18-0 while posting some crazy stats. They outscored their opponent 189-39 over the 18 games. No matter the score, it was an important step forward in America and Japan's baseball bond, and doubled as a diplomatic tool to bring the nations closer. With the arrival of World War II, there were nearly 2 decades in which no American baseball team made the trip over to the land of the rising sun. A cultural gap had grown, but there was no better way to repair that than sharing the national pastime once again. For the first time ever, a Major League Baseball team crossed the Pacific to face Japanese teams. Horace Stoneham and the New York Giants accepted an invitation to play a series of exhibition games in Japan. They were invited by Japanese newspaper Yomiuri Shimbun, who covered all of the Giants' expenses on the trip, including airfare. Following approval by the federal government and MLB, New York made the trip. They thrived, winning their first 9 games and posting an overall record of 12-1-1 against various Japanese teams, including the powerhouse Tokyo Giants. Stoneham considered the trip a great success, and the goodwill gesture opened the door for future visits from MLB squads. In fact, the next one came only 2 years later. Following their shocking loss to Brooklyn in the 1955 Fall Classic, the New York Yankees took a visit to Japan. Thousands packed the streets to greet the American League pennant winners. Like in the present day, the Bronx Bombers had a large following in Japan, likely due to their constant star power. This time around, it wasn't Babe or the Iron Horse, but Mantle and Barrow. New York went 15-0-1 across their 3-week, 16-game expedition. They remained the only Major League team to go undefeated on a Japanese tour. Despite the tough losses, the goodwill gained outweighed the on-field results. Fans in Japan were sad to see the trip end and clamored for the Yankees' return in future years. Unfortunately for them, that would be the Yankees' last visit for decades. In 1955, the Yankees lost to the Dodgers in the World Series and fled to Japan for a postseason tour. In 1956, the roles were reversed, with the Bronx Bombers defeating Brooklyn in 7 games to win it all, and the Dodgers heading out to Japan. They experienced great success, going 14-4-1 in their first trip to Asia. There was far less drama than their next trip there, which came a decade later, but for now, Brooklyn showed out with plenty of star power, bringing Jackie Robinson, Duke Snider, Roy Campanella, and several other iconic Dodgers. The St. Louis Cardinals took a trip to Japan in 1958, led by Stan Musial. The Cards were Japan's 3rd choice following the 2 pennant winners, but still put on a good show. With Kazuhisa Inao and Shigeo Nagashima for the All-Japan squad, each had some impressive names. Japan's top guys couldn't stop St. Louis though, who dominated with a 14-2 record. 1 year later, Sadaharu Oh would make his pro debut with Nagashima's Yomiuri Giants, soon forming one of team sports' most commanding dynasties. The Giants, now residing in San Francisco, carried on their tradition of the city's connection with Japanese baseball by taking another trip across the Pacific. 11-year MLB veteran and Japanese Baseball Hall of Famer Lefty O'Doul was a San Fran native and made extreme contributions to the growth of our great sport in Japan. Lefty's San Francisco Seals were the first American team of any kind to visit Japan following World War II. By the 60s, it was clear that the skill gap was slowly closing between MLB and NPB talent. Horace Stoneham brought a good team, with Mays, McCovey, Cepeda, and more all making the trip. It was a rough start for the Californians, as the home team took the first 2 games, marking the worst start for any MLB team that had or would visit in the future. They found their footing, eventually closing out the tour with 11 wins. They were victorious in 7 of their last 8 games, headlined by impressive outings from the future Hall of Famers. The Giants' links would only get stronger 4 years later, when they signed pitcher Masanori Murakami as the first Japanese-born player in MLB history. With a limited squad, the Detroit Tigers headed to Japan following a mediocre 4th-place American League finish. Injuries plagued the team all year, leading them to limp into their tour of Japan with only 3 outfielders and a 9-man pitching staff. Though they weren't 100% healthy, some stars made the trip like Al Kaline and Jim Bunning. Battling poor weather throughout the entire tour, Detroit went 12-4-2. Tigers manager Bob Sheffing was impressed by Japanese baseball, almost feeling humbled by the experience. After getting swept by Baltimore in the Fall Classic, the Los Angeles Dodgers played an 18-game tour in Japan. Several stars declined to make the trip, the likes of Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale. This, along with team captain Maury Wills leaving the trip early with a leg injury, significantly hurt ticket sales. Dodgers owner Walter O'Malley expected more from his players, especially the captain. It didn't matter for Koufax, who announced his retirement shortly before the team's departure to Asia. While over there, the star-dimmed Dodgers finished with a record of 9-8-1, ending the excursion on a 4-game losing streak. 8 losses are the most by any of the major league teams that have visited. It would be their last trip to the Far East for almost 60 years. When the St. Louis Cardinals returned to Japan, they noticed that the Japanese players had gotten much better than they were a decade before. Big contributors to this statement were Sadaharu Oh and Yutaka Inatsu. Both thrived against the NL pennant winners, posting some tremendous numbers. Exhausted following a 7-game World Series loss to the Tigers, the Cards lost 2 of the first 5 games, but got into a groove to win 10 of their final 13. Reflecting on it all, St. Louis felt that Oh and Inatsu were ready to play back in America. Red Shandian said Inatsu was one of the best southpaws he'd ever seen. Although neither star would make the jump to the USA, they each had tremendous careers and are regarded in the present day as 2 of the best to ever play in Japan. Even though they might have underperformed as a whole, stars like Bob Gibson, Orlando Cepeda, and Lou Brock all participated. The lone team to make a preseason tour of Japan, things didn't go to plan for the 1970 San Francisco Giants. While they saw the trip as an extension of spring training, the Japanese teams were eager to show that they could hang. They couldn't have had it easier, with San Fran following typical spring training protocol. Willie Mays would get a couple at-bats, Juan Marichal would only go a couple innings. They were never playing a full game. NPB's best teams took advantage, sending the Giants back home with a sad 3-6 record. The journey was bad beyond the box score too. Juan Marichal fell ill with an ear and throat infection. He suffered an allergic reaction to penicillin, leading to chronic arthritis and back pain. He'd go on to have one of the worst seasons of his career to that point. The weather was brutal, as was the transition from warm and sunny Arizona to the bitter cold of Japan. Catcher Jack Hyatt even said that they played through snow one game. To no surprise, the 70 Giants were the first and last team to play spring training exhibition games in the land of the rising sun. The Baltimore Orioles embarked on their first trek to Japan in 1971. For years, Matsuharu Shiriki had been trying to get the World Series champion to come play against the Japan Series champ, creating a true World Series. What was a great idea would never come to fruition. Although the trip was agreed upon following Baltimore's 1970 Fall Classic victory, they fell to the Pirates in 1971, once again leading to a pennant winner traveling abroad. 11 of their 18 scheduled games were against the Yomiuri Giants, who were in the midst of a record 9 consecutive Japan Series titles. The 2 clubs are familiar with one another, as the Giants visited during spring training that year. While in Florida, they played 6 exhibition games, one against the O's, who won 6-4. The Orioles brought all their best talent and put on a show. They went 12-2-4, the best record on tour since the 1958 Cardinals. Boog Powell and Brooks Robinson shined at the plate, while Baltimore's 4 20-game winners combined to go 9-1, limiting Sadaharu Oh to a 111 batting average. Pat Dobson shined the brightest, tossing a no-hitter on November 2nd against Yomiuri. Hall of Famer Frank Robinson's final game as an Oriole came in Japan, as he would be traded to the Dodgers just 2 weeks later. Having experienced such great success, this wouldn't be the last time the O's made a visit. The New York Mets made their first trip to Japan in 1974, but were quickly overshadowed by a division rival. On April 8, 1974, Hammerin' Hank Aaron swatted his 715th home run to pass the Great Bambino for most in MLB history. Following the legendary milestone, Japan invited Aaron over for a home run contest with their own power-hitting hero, Sadaharu Oh. 40-year-old Hank defeated 34-year-old Oh 10-9, but that's a journey for another time. The Mets were coming off a disappointing 1974 campaign, only one season off a National League pennant. Nonetheless, the Japanese faithful were excited to witness the likes of Tom Seaver, new signing Joe Torre, and Hall of Fame catcher-turned-manager Yogi Berra. New York faced Sadaharu O's Giants in 10 of their 18 games, going an underwhelming 2-6-2 against Yomiuri. Overall, they finished 9-7-2, even after out-homering their opponents 28-12. O hit .322 with 6 round trippers against the Mets. Shigeo Nagashima, who had retired after the 74 campaign, proved that he could still swing it by batting .444. It was his last time on the diamond as a player. Joe Torre was overall impressed by the opposing players, going as far to say that a select few, likely guys like Sadaharu O, could make it to the bigs. 2 years removed from winning back-to-back World Series championships, the Cincinnati Reds made their lone voyage to the other side of the world. The trip went swimmingly, as they posted a dominant 14-2-1 record against their Japanese counterparts, since he had brought one of the strongest rosters an MLB team had provided for a visit to Japan. Talent was plentiful, featuring the likes of Johnny Bench, Pete Rose, Tom Seaver, and George Foster. That's even without Joe Morgan, Dave Concepcion, and Cesar Geronimo, who didn't make the trip. Pete Rose traveled with the team despite being a free agent, as he had business commitments in Japan. The games he played over there would be the last of his first stint with Cincinnati. The tour would mark the beginning of the end for the Big Red Machine, though. Shortly after returning back to the States, Hall of Fame manager Sparky Anderson was fired, marking the first domino to fall in the Reds' collapse. It came as a shock to everyone, as Sparky had led the Reds to 5 division titles, 4 pennants, and 2 world championships during his tenure as skipper. Although they'd win the NL West in 1979, it would be another decade until their next postseason appearance. Who would have thought that a successful time in Japan would begin the slow rust of the Big Red Machine? Following their AL pennant win in 1980, the Kansas City Royals were invited to Japan for a goodwill tour, a 17-game trip around the country. KC would embark on the journey after the 1981 campaign. It would be a long road to get there, with 1981 being full of league-wide drama. The Royals struggled as a team, going 20-30 in the first half of the season. Thanks to a strike canceling 38% of all games, the year was split into 2 halves. The Royals somehow won the AL West in the second half by going 30-23, limping into the postseason with a 50-53 total record. They knew they didn't belong, and were validated in that thought by getting swept by Oakland in the ALDS. Looking to have a stronger 1982, they headed to Japan to test staff changes and prepare the guys. They took all of their regulars besides Amos Otis, who was home recovering from a leg injury. Struggles continued for the Royals, who went a depressing 9-7-1. They finished strong, winning 6 of their last 7, but at one point suffered through a 5-game losing streak. George Brett was impressed by what he saw from the opposing dugout, as it was clear that Japan's baseball abilities continued to grow with every major league meeting. The Baltimore Orioles took their second flight to Japan following the 1984 season, returning after over a decade away. At this point, the Japanese players were much better than the O's last trip, even though Sadaharu O was now retired as a player, leading the Giants from the dugout as manager. Baltimore featured several All-Stars such as Cal Ripken Jr. and Eddie Murray, but largely struggled throughout their time abroad. They went 8-5-1, going 0-3-1 against combined squads and All-Star teams. Per usual, Japan's best saw it as an opportunity to prove themselves. Orioles players were just looking for a good game of baseball, not willing to input much effort. Although the big players thrived, the record wasn't impressive compared to previous tours. The 1984 Orioles would be the final major league club to make their way through Japan, as a new way to play emerged 2 years later. In 1986, MLB and NPB collaborated to form the MLB Japan All-Star Series, pitting the best of Major League Baseball against the best of Nippon Professional Baseball. The Best of series took place intermittently from the late 80s into the 2010s. America's big leaguers typically traveled well, and the results reflected that. MLB All-Stars won 9 of their initial 10 meetings, recording a 48-20-7 record. Once the World Baseball Classic arrived in 2006, the series took an 8-year hiatus, resuming in 2014 with a slightly different yet scale-tipping change. The MLB All-Stars would now face off against Samurai Japan, the elite national team that had won 2 of the first 3 World Baseball Classics. This matchup would occur twice, in 2014 and 2018, with Samurai Japan winning both series with ease. As the World Baseball Classic has only continued to blossom in popularity, the future of the MLB Japan All-Star Series is in doubt. But for a couple decades, it successfully bridged the gap between North America and Japan's best. On August 16, 1996, the San Diego Padres and New York Mets took the field at Estadio de Baseball Monterrey in Monterrey, Mexico, marking the first international regular season game in Major League Baseball history. Following the success of that series and a 1999 one-off between the Rockies and Padres, the league headed east for some opening day baseball. On March 29th and 30th, 2000, the New York Mets and Chicago Cubs took to the Tokyo Dome. It was the first pair of regular season games played overseas. In front of 55,000, Sammy Sosa's Cubs and Mike Piazza's Mets split the 2-game set. Japan flew the W after the Cubs' 5-3 victory in the first game, led by a 2-hit day from Sosa and 2-run blast off the bat of Shane Andrews. The Mets got back in Game 2, claiming a 5-1 win in 11 innings. Benny Agbayani provided the fireworks and sent the fans into a frenzy with a pinch-hit, go-ahead grand slam. New York became the first team to not only play, but win games in 2 different countries outside of the US and Canada. After a decade with the Yomiuri Giants, in which he amassed 332 homers and a .304 average, Hideki Matsui took his talents to the Bronx, inking a 3-year, $21 million deal. He thrived in his first big league campaign, earning selection to the Midsummer Classic and a second-place finish in AL Rookie of the Year voting. It wouldn't be long before he appeared back home in Japan, with the New York Yankees opening the 2004 season at the Tokyo Dome against the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. Matsui's return garnered much fanfare, as he received a hero's welcome. The Yankees squared off with his former employers in an exhibition before the real games began. Although the Devil Rays took the first game, Godzilla recorded the first hit of the 2024 MLB season, a first-inning double. In front of a full house once again, the Bronx Bombers bounced back in a big way, posting a 12-1 thrashing of Tampa Bay. Matsui delivered for the fans with a 2-run shot, resulting in a crowd explosion you have to hear.
To get that record. Deep to right center field. Going back is Cruz, looking up. See ya! A home run. Hideki Matsui, 2-run shot. And the Yankees now lead 5-1.
Making Yankee players and fans alike grateful that he was on their side. Despite their booming popularity there, this surprisingly remains New York's lone regular season trip to Japan. It had always been Matsutaro Shoriki's goal to get a World Series champion in Japan. Although this wasn't a tour of the country, nearly 40 years after his passing, it finally happened. The Boston Red Sox opened 2008 at the Tokyo Dome, coming off a season that ended with the Commissioner's Trophy. Like the Yankees in '04, the Red Sox also had a Japanese star who had recently made the jump to the bigs. Daisuke Matsuzaka arrived in Boston after 8 years with the Seibu Lions, and helped them win their second title in 4 years. Daisuke started the season opener in front of over 44,000 adoring fans. He exited in line for the win, but ended up with a no decision as the game reached extras. Manny Ramirez ripped an RBI double in the top of the 10th, and Jonathan Papelbon escaped a dicey bottom half to secure a narrow 6-5 win. Sox reliever Hideki Okajima, who also just came from NPB, picked up the win with a scoreless ninth. Game 2 was a more straightforward victory, this time for the Oakland Athletics. Rich Harden led the way with 6 innings of 1-run ball and 9 punch-outs. MLB's next trip to Japan had plenty of similarities to the last. Not only did the A's return to play the Tokyo Dome, but another Japanese great made the journey back home. Ichiro Suzuki and the Seattle Mariners squared off against Oakland in front of over 44,000 Ichiro fanatics. Back where it all started, Suzuki began the final season of his first stint with the M's by recording 4 hits in Seattle's 3-1 11-inning triumph. He capped off the strong showing with an RBI single in the final frame. The game meant so much to Ichiro, who knew it had added meaning to the Japanese faithful. Like the previous 3 opening series in the Land of the Rising Sun, it ended in a split. The A's were able to bounce back thanks to strong pitching from Bartolo Colon, heading home with a 1-1 record. The 2 AL West rivals met again 7 years later, just in time for Ichiro to return to the Mariners and make his farewell. The 45-year-old legend got the start in right field, going 0 for 1 with a walk before being pulled in the 4th inning. The M's and A's combined for 5 homers in a Game 1 win for Seattle. Ichiro suited up for Game 2, but news broke that he would be retiring. Emotions welled as the game went on, and come the 8th inning, it was time for him to say goodbye. In front of his native fans, one being teammate Yusei Kikuchi, who was making his big league debut, Suzuki jogged off the field for the final time, a fitting close to an illustrious baseball career. It was a happy ending and the first sweep for a visit to Japan, as the Mariners clutched a 5-4 success in 12 innings. In 2019, MLB World Tour was in its infancy, but come 2025, the league is full go on growing the game globally. From London to Korea to Mexico, Major League Baseball has been doing more over the last several years to take our national pastime worldwide. They decided to open the 2025 season in Japan in the best way possible. The defending champion Los Angeles Dodgers, led by Japanese darlings Shohei Ohtani, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and newly signed Roki Sasaki, took on the Chicago Cubs, who had Samurai Japan products of their own in Seiya Suzuki and Shota Imanaga. There was no better way to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the league's first trip to Japan than with the biggest Japanese stars on the planet. The Dodgers had previously played regular season games in Australia, Mexico, and South Korea, but this was their first time being involved in meaningful baseball in Japan. The Cubs played in the very first one, so it was fitting that they returned for the 25th. LA proved why they're the defending champs by sweeping the 2-game set. The Dodgers pitched both Yamamoto and Sasaki, the latter making his big league debut. Shohei Ohtani brought the fireworks, reaching base multiple times in both games and slugging a controversial yet newsworthy home run in Game 2. Overall, the trip was a success for Major League Baseball, and surely isn't the last we'll see of their ventures to Japan. An American introduced the Japanese to baseball over 150 years ago. Since, the love for our national pastime has only gotten stronger for both parties. Thanks to both countries' contributions to the game, the sport's future looks bright. This has been the Baseball Time Machine. Thanks for traveling with us.